أما بعد فقد قال علي بن الحسين عليهما الصلاة والسلام وأما حق فرجك فحفظه مما لا يحل لك والاستعانة عليه بغض البصر. صلوات بيجي محمد وعلى محمد. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. If you remember last week, we were talking about from Risalat ul-Huquq, the right of the private parts, Haqqul Faraj. And in this, our fourth Imam mentions when he says, and the right of your private part is that you should protect it from everything that is unlawful for you, and help it by lowering your eyes. This is certainly the best way to help it. And you should also remember death often, and threaten yourself with God and try to make yourself fear God. Preservation from the sin, or preservation from sin and receiving the help in doing so is possible by God's help. There's no strength or power but in Him. We see that obviously as Imam is discussing all of these rights, first and foremost, Imam gives us a general advice by saying you should not utilize this thing for that which is unlawful for you. And I mentioned this last week as well. Just a reminder, Imam expects that we should have little bit of knowledge as to what is halal and what is haram. Because if that was not already understood, Imam would not say, keep it away from that which is unlawful. So obviously Imam is assuming that the followers go ahead and learn what is halal and what is haram. At least they have this basic understanding. And if they don't, they should go ahead and inquire about it, because indeed it is one of the wajibat. It is actually one of the wajibat to inquire about the wajib and haram. So to speak, that what Imam is saying between the lines over here, it is your duty, it is incumbent upon you to learn what is lawful and what is unlawful. And obviously today, we will not be given this leeway on the day of judgment when we say this argument, oh Allah, I did not have access to finding out this mas'ala. This is something which will not be accepted. According to some of the riwayat, obviously we will not have this chance to go ahead and make this excuse that I did not hear this directly from Imam Ma'asum, or I did not see Prophet, or I did not see Imam Ma'asum, so I was unaware of this mas'ala. No, that is an excuse which will not be accepted on the day of judgment. Today, when we are capable, or if we have this technology, in our possession, we're able to find out things which are of our priority. Why is it that we lag behind in finding out things pertaining to the life hereafter? We're so much worried about the things in regards to this temporary life. We go out of our way to do research in regards to that, as to what to eat, what not to eat, what to wear, what not to wear, how to this and that. But when it comes to the hereafter, which is the most important, when we will be spending our entire life over there, we lag behind and we do not inquire in this regard. So asking is actually half the knowledge. That's what it says, that when you inquire about something, you should not feel, ashamed by it. If a person remained ashamed without asking a question, that is actually something which you have doubled the crime. Once that you did not inquire about it, second, you felt ashamed of asking this question. So there's no shame when it comes to deen and asking the questions in regards to religion. So this is what emphasis is being laid down by our fourth Imam as well, when he's saying that inquire about it, ask about it. He's telling us stay away from that which is unlawful. Right away, that sentence tells us that Imam is assuming that we have that much of the knowledge. Last week, if you remember from the traditions, we mentioned that we realized that the leaders of this religion have advised men and women against celibacy. And they also told them to get married in order to remain chaste. Otherwise, they were inclined towards illegal relations, such as adultery and all the other things that exist today in the society, that are basically the disease of the society. Obviously here, there's no need for me to go into mentioning the hurmat of zina or the hurmat of adultery, but just so that we are again up to par and we keep on reminding ourselves as to how big a crime it is. You look at Surah Bani Israel, verse number 32. Allah says in Quran, وَلَا تَقْرَبُوا الزِّنَا إِنَّهُ كَانَ فَاحِشَةً وَسَاءَ سَبِيلًا. It says, do not approach adultery. It is indeed an indecency and evil way. We see that this short verse, it's a very small ayat of Quran. By reciting, many of you might have actually memorized it, and it would not take that much of an effort. Well, we see that this small or short verse stresses three important points in this small verse. One thing is, this verse does not state, do not commit adultery. You saw that how Allah is addressing the mu'mineen and those whom Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is also respecting, that He considers that you shouldn't even do this. Forget about doing it. He said, La taqrabu zina. Do not even approach it. Taqrabu comes from qurbat. Do not go near it. The same way it says, La taqrabu salat wa antum sukara. Do not approach or go close to the salat in the time when you are intoxicated, because that's how bad it is. So qurbat over here is being what you refrain from. Not that you should go ahead and stay away from this action. Rather, or you should commit this action. It did not say do not perform zina. Rather, it said do not go near this zina. And this is why we see, rather, it says do not approach this wicked deed. This verse shows that although adultery is a very bad deed, but there are other ways which might eventually lead you towards it. The concept when he says la taqrabu is telling us that there are other things which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not mention over here, which is again He's leaving on to the thinker to go ahead and think about. All of those things which lead you towards qurbat of zina, those things which lead you close to or bring you close to adultery, all of those things at the result also become haram for you. The same way, wudu itself is not wajib, but when it becomes a prelude to the namaz wajib, the salat which is wajib, the wudu also becomes wajib, because without the wudu you cannot perform salat. So shart or the condition for salat is the wudu. By itself, wudu is not wajib. But when it becomes a prelude to the salat wajib, it becomes wajib. You have to perform it. Therefore, we see over here, la taqrabu zina. Yeah, zina, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, stay away from it. That altogether is a bad and wicked deed. But also those things which are leading you towards this zina, that is also something which is haram for you. So between the line, there are a lot of things which are being said over here. We just look at the apparent ayah, and that is why it is so common that we make a mistake when we recite the translation of a verse of Quran and we interpret it without realizing all of the things and the implied meaning which is attached behind and between these verses. Salawat bi Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So acts like flirting, looking, not observing hijab properly, or reading or viewing, or visiting the places of corruption, all of these things are basically prelude towards this adultery, and therefore it is being mentioned, la taqrabu zina, as well as all of those things which become the muqaddama and the prelude towards. The second thing, this verse clearly expresses the extreme degree of the wickedness of adultery. It says, Innahu kana fahishatan. There's no doubt about it being indecent. Innahu kana fahishatan. So therefore, this thing is definitely, bitahqiq, without a doubt, it is indecency. No doubt about that. And third, the verse states that adultery will also pave the way for other forms of corruption in the society. Now, there are a lot of things that are discussed in regards to the philosophy behind why it is haram. I don't really need to go into. As a Muslim, we understand why it is haram and what is the social concept that Islam is trying to exemplify over here. That with this sort of relationship, the outcome and the consequences are always going to be difficult and terrible, and therefore it is something which has been made forbidden. Some of the effects, although we can discuss in this regards as to what ahadith and Ma'asumin ﷺ have mentioned. It says in a hadith from our first Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen, Ali ibn Abi Talib ﷺ, who quotes Prophet of Islam, he says, فِي الزِّنَا سِتُّ خِصَالٍ ثَلَاثٌ فِي الدُّنْيَا وَثَلَاثٌ فِي الْآخِرَةِ. He said there are 6 bad effects of adultery. Now there are probably many other effects, but these are the 6. 3 are in this world and 3 are in the hereafter. So Imam is mentioning 3 here and 3 over there. He said, فَأَمَّا اللَّوَاتِ فِي الدُّنْيَا فَيَذْهَبُ بِنُورِ الْوَجْهِ. He says the first thing that it does, it removes this illumination or the nur and the sincerity and the divine illumination from the face of you. For your face, it is removing this divine illumination. That's the first effect which is of the zina. وَيَقْطَعُ الرِّزْقِ. Second effect is that it decreases one's share of daily bread. So it stops the arrival of one's daily bread, or it decreases the sustenance of insan. وَيُسْرَعُ الْفَنَاءِ. The third thing is that it speeds up man's destruction. It leads you towards destruction as quickly as possible. These are the three effects that Imam says are in this world. And we can explain, or we can see, and we see these things all the time. What Imam is mentioning over here, this is something which is apparent. أَمَّا اللَّوَاتِ فِي الْآخِرَةِ. Those which are going to be affecting you in the hereafter, first of all is فَغَضَبُ الرَّبِّ. First thing is that it will raise the anger of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala upon you. وَسُوءُ الْحِسَابِ. It will make your accountability difficult. وَالدُّخُولُ أَوْ الْخُلُودُ فِي النَّارِ. Third is that it will result in entry or remaining forever in the fire of hell. With some of the other guna or the sins that insan does, there is a possibility that yes, you will spend some time in the hell, but for a time being, until you have done your work, or the time that you were supposed to spend for that haram that you had committed, then you will be upgraded towards the paradise. But with this guna, with this sin, it says according to this hadith, you will remain in this hell forever. Khulud fil nar. There's no turning around and being upgraded after spending a few years or few whatever time in this hellfire, because this is the crime, and this is the grave crime, or the result of this crime which is being mentioned over here. It also said one thing, that it brings destruction and it brings poverty. And we see that also in the society, how a person who's indulges into such acts, how the life is completely destroyed. And there's obviously definitely when Imam is mentioning such a thing and Ma'soom is mentioning such a thing, so therefore, even if we do not see the implication apparently in our lives or in the life that we live in, or our people surrounding us who are indulged into these activities, still do not count this out and do not take this for granted. What Imam is saying, definitely it will have this effect. The last thing that Imam Rasul mentioned over here, he said, إِذَا كَثُرَ الزِّنَا مِن بَعْدِ كَثُرَ مَوْتُ الْفَجَاءِ. He says, when the adultery becomes widespread after me, there will be frequent occurrences of sudden death. Now, there are other things in this regard as far as some of the punishments and so on and so forth. I'm not going to go into those details. Just the last part of what Imam, our fourth Imam, was mentioning as to how do you stay away from it. He provides the cure for it. First cure that he provided, he said, lower your gaze. Keep your eyes low. That's the first thing of guarding your private parts. That's the only thing of guarding your private parts. Secondly, they mention the concept of marriage. Marriage is something which will keep you away from indecency and evil from this aspect. We see over here, another thing that Ma'sumin have mentioned is the concept of death. It said death, or frequent remembrance of death, is also something which will result in refraining or staying away from it. It says staying chaste by remembering death. How do you remain chaste? By remembering death. Imam says his expressed ways to remain chaste. He says the first thing to do is not to view forbidden scenes. That's first thing. Lower your eyes. Second way is to remember death a lot, more frequently. How does that say? Well, look at Surah Qaf, verse number 19. وَجَاءَتْ سَكْرَةُ الْمَوْتِ بِالْحَقِّ ذَلِكَ مَا كُنْتَ مِنْهُ تَحِيدٌ. It says the human being will certainly experience the agony of death, and the human being will be told, this is what you had been trying to run away from. So death is something which will come on every single person. So why not go ahead and start remembering it? Unfortunately, in our societies, in our lives, in the cultural background that we come from, as soon as you mention maut, right away people say, no, don't talk about maut. This is something, right away you're told to say good things, as if death is something which is bad. So you stay away from it. Or, in a time of joy, if someone mentions death or something about death is mentioned, right away people spread out and say, well, look at this person. He's bringing, this environment. He's causing nahusat in this environment, in other words. Or, with the word of death, he's basically ruining the whole, society, or the whole community, or he's ruining the whole gathering that we have, for example. This is something which we need to get rid of from our mentalities, that death is not something which will bring death upon you. A lot of times we think when we mention death more often, that means we're going to bring death upon us. Allah is going to hasten this death upon us. And if we were to die 20 years from now, we'll die 10 years from now, if we keep on mentioning this death. No, that is not the case. Eventually, Imam is over here mentioning that death is basically a state where, if you want to know that what our fourth Imam said, he says, when he was asked about death, this is what he replied by. He said, Al-mawtu lil-mu'min kad-naz'i thiyabin wa sakhatin qamulatin wa fakki quyudin wa aglalin thaqilatin wa istibdalin bi afkhar al-thiyabi wa atyabiha, and so on and so forth. Imam says, for a believer, death is like removing dirty, lice-infested clothes and unfastening heavy chains and logs in exchange for the most beautiful and the best garments. If you want to know what death is for a moment, this is what the death is. Do you not want to remove these lice-infested clothes and the garments that you have put on upon yourself? Don't you want to remove these dirty clothes that you have put on upon yourself? Don't you want to remove and unshackle these chains and these heavy locks that you have put upon yourself? In return, in compensation, with what? With something which is the most beautiful and the best of the garments, the most comfortable mounts and the most delightful dwellings. Do you not want to trade it with that? This is what death is as far as a mu'min is concerned. However, for an unbeliever, death is like taking off the most magnificent clothes and moving out of the loved houses in exchange for the filthiest and the coarsest clothes, the most desolate of dwellings, and the greatest punishment. So obviously you go ahead and choose which category do we belong to. If you belong to the category of mu'mineen, then according to Imam, it is something where you're removing these clothes which are dirty and you're putting on this garment which is looked down by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as something which is accepted. Salawat bi Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So no, mentioning of the death more often or remembrance of the death more often is not something which will cause you to die soon. Unfortunately, we got to somehow change this culture where we think that, bad words will bring bad things upon us and they will cause this. No, that's not the case. If that was the case, Ma'asumeen would not be advising us and exhorting us towards remembrance of such thing. We look at the interpretation of death from the perspective of our Imam Hussein alayhi salatu wassalam, when he said, O children of noble men. I don't have time, so I won't read the Arabic. He said, O children of noble men, persevere. Death is nothing but a bridge transferring you from hardship and suffering to the vast garden of heaven and the lasting blessings. Which of you dislikes moving from a prison into a palace? Which one of you would deny? If you were to ask, you say, we are living in right now, if you ask us, our lives are kind of like prison. Moulana, we're living in a prison as it is. But wouldn't you like to be moved from this prison into a palace? If today, the worldly prison, if you were living to a worldly prison and someone was to offer you to live into a palace, wouldn't you take this offer? You'd take it right away. You won't even think for a second or think otherwise. The same thing is what Imam is mentioning over here. Life is, it's transfer. What is this? The dislikes moving from the prison into a palace. However, death for your enemies is only, as mentioned, transferred from a palace into a prison and punishment. So it's the opposite towards your enemies. My father, Imam is quoting, saying that my father quoted on the authority of Prophet of Islam that this world is like a prison for believers and heaven for the unbelievers. And that's why you see that a lot of unbelievers are enjoying in this part. And that's the reason they are given all of these luxuries, because they made this into their paradise. A lot of time when the question is raised as to we see the non-Muslims, those who don't even believe in any of the religion or any of the divine religions or even in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they're living the most happy life and the most luxurious life and they're enjoying everything which should be given to the mu'mineen. No, they are given or they have utilized those things because they established this place to be their paradise and they want to spend. This is the place where they have inhabited and there's no concept for them for the hereafter. Unfortunately, we got to start thinking in a way that mu'min thinks that this place is a prison for him and he will be moving into a place which is considered to be a palace for him. Salawat bi Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. And then our fourth Imam also mentions at another place, inshallah I'll wrap it up in the next a minute and a half. Death for the believer is like breathing in a most pleasant breeze, the fragrance of which makes him slumber, and tiredness and pain comes to an end. But for the unbeliever, it is like biting of the snakes and the sting of scorpions, and even more severe than that. So the analogies that we see that Imam is mentioning over here are all so that we can relate to it right away. Right away, you look at this example and you relate to it. Obviously, sometimes you say, well, these examples are for children too, because the concept of scorpion and all that stuff. No, actually, Imam is also, he understands the mentality of human being, and that's why he's giving such examples to us. And lastly, we see that Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib ﷺ said the following about the time of death, when the curtains to the unseen are drawn aside and the angels enter. He said, if you could see what the dead see, you would be distressed and terrified. As a result, you would hear and obey God's words. However, what they see is veiled from you, and soon the veil will be drawn aside for you, and you too will be able to see. And that is why we see that a lot of time when the ayat of Quran also says, وَعْبُدْ رَبَّكَ حَتَّى يَأْتِيَكَ الْيَقِينَ. Worship Lord until you reach this certainty, yaqeen. And what is the translation of this word yaqeen? Yaqeen is translated as death. It's not certainty. Certainty by reaching this death. Because when you reach this death, right away you embrace this certainty. All of the veils are lifted from in front of you. And that's why you're able to see the clear picture. But lest we want to see this clear picture right in this world. We want to be able to see the clear picture when we are alive in our all senses. Not when we have died, then we see the real picture. Everyone will be able to see the real picture at that time. The important thing is to be able to see the picture or the certainty or have this yaqeen while you're still breathing, while you're still living, and that would be a skill that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would count over here. Refer to Surah Takathur, the 3 levels of yaqeen which are mentioned, 2 of them in Surah Takathur, 1 of them in Surah Waqi'ah, are the 3 levels of ilmul yaqeen, ainul yaqeen, and haqqul yaqeen. In the tafsir of it, if you refer towards it, it says this haqqul yaqeen is basically when a person is able to feel this thing, when he's able to see it. And لَتَرَوُنَّ الْجَحِيمِ means that you see the hell while you're still alive. Not seeing the hell when you die, because everybody will witness the hell when you die. But when you see it while you're still alive, that is something which is a matter of skill and honor. Let us ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us a tawfiq to be able to embrace this death and not be afraid of this death, how Ma'asumeen and the kalam of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the kalam of Ma'asumeen is exhorting us to do so. Oh Allah, we have committed a lot of sins. Please forgive our sins. Oh Allah, help us or strengthen us in order to follow the teachings of Ma'asumeen alayhi salatu wasalam. Oh Allah, give us the strength to be able to follow the footsteps of Ma'asumeen alayhi salatu wasalam. Oh Allah, hasten the zuhur of our weighted Imam and make us among the helpers and the soldiers of Imam. Wa akhir dawana and alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Allah.